Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the National Association of Black Counselors Town Hall on Project 2025 and Agenda 47. I am Dr. Nick Battle. I'm the president of NABC. We have Angel Moss Baker on. She is our vice president, and Dr. Dennis Winkler, who is our head of our education department. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Winkler, who will be moderating our discussion for today. So it's on to you, Dr. Winkler.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm so excited. We're so excited to have each and every one of you here today. Quick shout out to my students who are coming in the building representing Boise State. So yeah, thanks for joining us. I want to start by saying I'm Dr. Dennis Winkler, proud member of NABC and currently director of educational committee here at NABC. I want to take a moment to thank our president, Dr. Nick Battle, and Vice President Mrs. Angel Moss Baker for all the work they're doing, and the rest of the board and committee. I also want to take the moment to recognize Dr. Faye Bonner and Ms. Tamara Farabi, visionaries who paved the way for our great organization, the National Association of Black Counselors. The National Black Association of Black Counselors, I want to just go over our mission. I think is in line with our discussion today, our town hall. It is to provide an organization for African American people to advocate for and advance the mental health and well-being of African American individuals, organizations, communities, and the African diaspora through research, professional practice, education, advocacy, policy settings, and reform. Um, I do want to say that, if you are interested in being a part of a membership, we have membership opportunities here, and we're always looking for workers that can come and take National Association of Black Counselors to greater lengths, greater levels, because with all of us putting our hands in it, it makes the work a lot easier. But nonetheless, we need each other. I want to thank our panelists for agreeing to participate in the National Association of Black Counselors series of virtual town hall meetings today. Those who came before us, and those that will come next week. That also would pretty much include myself, Miss Angel Moss, Vice President, and President Dr. Nick Battle next week. So make sure y'all come out next week too. I think we'll have a great finale, great wrap up, and all that type of thing. So again, I want to thank the panelists for participating and thanking and being a part of this. So I want to quickly go over briefly an agenda for today. I would like to start with a few requests as we aim to create a safe space that encourages a variety of perspectives. I think that one of the things I think, and I'll get off my soapbox a little while here. I think one of the things that we as clinicians, as counselors, we have skill sets, and lots of times we use them on individual levels that I think we can also harness and utilize those skill sets on a national stage, such as the National Association of Black Counselors, when it's around social issues such as what we're talking about now. These conversations are not easy. However, even when experiencing strong emotions, dissonance, or visceral reactions, may we strive to learn from one another. Additionally, as listeners, may we assume positive intent, recognizing the complexity of these discussions, which often resist simple viewpoints or solutions. So, I want to go ahead and get started with our panelists. I don't all the panelists that are here. I see quite a few names. Mr. Michael Imhotep is here in the building. Dr. Nathalie Mizelle is in the building. I see Brother Sankofa, Marcus Sankofa Nix. Am I missing anyone? I think they're in the building. If someone else comes in, please let me know. But I would like to start off with questions. With a question for the panelists, please introduce yourselves in 2 minutes or less, sharing who you are, a little bit about your background, and your epistemological framework you will use to frame your perspective pertaining to the subject matter at hand. And we can start with Miss Dr. Mizelle. Oh, uh, can you hear me? Is everything okay?
I can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay.
Dr.
Well,
Mizelle, we can't hear you though.
as Dr. Mizelle gets that together, I'll ask Brother Michael Imhotep if he can go. And then if you come in after that, that's fine. Or Brother Sankofa Nix, you can go.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Assar. It's good to be here. Good to be in good company. I see we got brother Marcus Sankofa as well here. I haven't talked to him in a while. Hopefully, you all can hear me okay. So I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a historian, national political commentator, researcher, lecturer, writer. I've been talking about Project 2025 since 2023. When I first found out about it on Ali Velshi's show on MSNBC, September 2023. Prior to that, going back to about July of 2022, I read Jonathan Swan's article for Axios.com dealing with the Schedule F employees and the plan by possible Trump administration to reclassify the Schedule F employees. At the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. So I speak on multiple platforms, not just my platform, the African History Network show, but on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'm a panelist providing historical and political analysis. So I don't just study history, I also study politics as well. So today I'm going to present the evidence based upon understanding history, especially in politics, because your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. So these are things that I talk about and advocate for. And if somebody could, I'm also checking to see if this is on Facebook because I was just checking and it wasn't on there.
Dr. Battle, are we broadcasting on
Okay, I see it
NABC's?
now.
Okay.
I see it now. It just started. Okay, good. I'm gonna repost this.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Does that conclude your opening?
Yes,
All
that
right.
concludes my opening.
Well, thank you, Brother Michael Imhotep. Dr. Mizelle, if you're ready, you can jump out there. Sounds like you might be still having some issues. I'll go to Brother Sankofa Nix and we'll circle back.
Now.
Dr. Okay. Thought you were trying to get in there, Doctor. So, my name is Marcus Sankofa Nix. Greetings, everybody. I'm glad to be reconnected with everybody here as part of this family and this organization, this community here. I hail from the Maryland area, DMV, as many call it, DC, Maryland, Virginia. And so I'm a historian, I'm an educator. I consider myself a healer activist, and I consider myself many other things. But I've spent as a professional about 12 years or so in the K through 12 public school system of Howard County, teaching African American studies. I also have served as a museum curator of special collections for African American history and cultural spaces, African American history and culture museum in particularly. My beloved dear friend, Dr. Dr. Assar, for the Winkler, he and I have worked intensely, significantly together in urban spaces in Baltimore City, supporting individuals, families, collective groups, and the community at large from an African-centered approach as it pertains to holistic healing, wellness, amongst many things. And so I think it was asked the approach. And I would say that one of the approaches that I like to take is an African-centered approach. However, I would argue and say that that approach has not enabled me to be successful from my experiences in the field and my research and what I've uncovered, not just solely with Black folk, African folk, African American folk, those of African descent, but it's enabled me to also make significant inroads with populations even beyond just that particular group. I also have a business that I operate entitled History Heals Consulting LLC, which is similar to that, which is the mission and vision of this organization as well, which is to advance African American studies and African American history, and through that lens, be a beacon of inspiration, healing and wellness and empowerment for companies, nonprofits, organizations, businesses. So glad to be here. I'm excited to offer what I've been able to uncover in the field. And as a historian, I definitely would say that it is an interdisciplinary field. So with that, I take it to account, just as Brother Imhotep said, politics, economics, social relations, and many different facets into my analysis. Good to see you, Brother Imhotep. It has been a minute, it has been a while. Nevertheless, I'm here to learn also, as well as to offer what I can for this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Nix. Dr. Mizelle, are you are you able to talk up now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, great. Okay.
Sound good.
Okay. Thank you. I was trying to, I don't know what happened. Okay, my name is Dr. Nathalie Mizelle. I'm the chairperson and at the University of District of Columbia. And I'm the chairperson of the education, counseling, social work, and speech and language programs. And I used to be the director of the counseling programs. And that's rehab, mental health, and school. And at this time, a lot of my work has been on women in depression, microaggressions, and working with persons with disabilities.
Thank you,
Well,
Doc.
we can't see you though, Dr. Mizelle.
Oh, okay.
Now everything's working?
Thank you, thank you, Ms. Moss.
All right.
All right, thank you. Did that conclude your opening, Dr. Mizelle?
Yes.
All right, thank you, panelists, for your opening statements. It seems that we're gonna have a fruitful discussion, and so I'll start off with the first question, and let's say we can always, from my standpoint, bring these questions back to mental health if it helps in aid in the discussion, especially in education, of course, which is much of what we're going to be speaking about today, and how Project 47 and Project 2025 and Agenda 47 may impact that in pertaining to the Black community. So, first question: how do Project 25 and or Agenda 47 align with or diverge from the historical goals of civil rights and Black power movements, particularly in relation to education and social equity for Black Americans? And anyone can jump out and answer and respond to that. Or I might just call.
I can start with that, and I may double back with some additional information, but I can start with that. I mean, if it's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So with Project 2025 and Agenda 47, and basically, I think the best way to understand Agenda 47, which is the plan coming from Donald Trump and the Trump campaign, is Project 2025 is a instruction plan on how to implement Agenda 47, because they mirror each other. So one of the things that we see is the attack on public education. And one of the ways they plan on attacking public education is doing away with the Department of Education. The Department of Education was created in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter. Okay, and we know that if you're going back in history, understanding this whole fight with the religious right and the creation and the expansion of, after Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, the expansion of what are called segregation academies, and these schools, private schools set up by white Christian churches. Okay, so you've had this contention since Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, fighting against desegregation, one. Two, when the Department of Education was created in 1979 and implemented, it began in 1980. You've had this attack on the Department of Education because the majority, a high percentage of the children in public education are African Americans. We have seen a concerted effort to push school vouchers and private academies and things like this coming from the right wing, okay? All of this has been an attack over the past, going back 40 years or so, on public education. So what we're going to see here, we see them wanting to remove terms that include diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to see them totally abolish the Department of Education. The Department of Education, one of the things that the Department of Education does is distributes student loans, but also Pell Grants. We know that African Americans who go to college disproportionately go to college, part of their funding is coming from Pell Grants, okay? So when we look at this attack, it's important to understand the two critical things, and I'll wrap up with this. The Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation was founded in 1973 by Paul Wayrick, okay? In 1976, it's going to be Paul Wayrick and Jerry Falwell right around that time that are going to create what's known as the religious right, okay? The religious right. And originally, the fight for the with the religious right was against Roe versus Wade and abortion, things like this. But it's going to switch to well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Originally, it was dealing with school desegregation. It was the fight against school desegregation and the attack on what we'll call segregation academies because of Supreme Court rulings and because of policies coming from the federal government. What they're going to do is they're going to switch from the fight for the against the school desegregation and the segregation academies to galvanize more people. They're going to take up the anti-abortion movement. Because when you actually look at the history on this, you had a lot of evangelicals and evangelical ministers who agree with Roe versus Wade early on, 1973. But at the root of the attack on abortion rights and at the root of fighting for the segregation academies, and one of the things that we saw was an increase in the use of school vouchers going to poor white students so they can keep schools white. They're trying to find a way around Brown versus Board of Education. So what Project 2025 is doing, what they want to do with the Department of Education is to really complete what they've been trying to do going back to 1954 after Brown versus Board of Education was implemented.
All right, thank you, Brother Michael Imhotep. Brother
Just want to put
Nick.
a disclaimer out because we already started talking about political parties. We do not endorse or support any political party. This is educational purposes only.
Yeah, I know you're nonpartisan. Yeah, I know you're nonpartisan. Yes, sir.
Because this is live. We want people to know that. We don't want.
Yeah, you're nonpartisan. Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Battle. Dr. Mizelle or Brother Nix, you want to take a stab at that, or?
I can go next. Yeah, so in terms of the question, I always say, in order to understand the present, it's always beneficial and impactful to take that historical approach and to help us contextualize things. Definitely, as Brother Imhotep said, there are some roots in history to address to help us understand how we got here. And I think about it broken down in a couple of things. And I think about first ideologically, right? So when we look at Project 2025, Agenda 47, what's the ideological motivation for this entity to bring about these documents and to try to push for this legislation? And I think about going back to the lost cause regime, taking it back to the post Civil War era when African Americans were emancipated. And I think about the aftermath of what happened with efforts to still uphold racism, white supremacy, and efforts to still uphold a regime of anti-Black domination, which we still see in effect. And a book for me that has actually helped me conceptualize things is Peniel Joseph's work, The Third Reconstruction, which pretty much speaks to three ways that we can break down history. The first Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1898, following the decades of Jim Crow. And then second, the Civil Rights era, Brown versus Board of Education to 1968, the assassination of Dr. King, and then more recently, the Barack Obama time period on into the Black Lives Matter movement. And so when we look at the political gains and all the things that have happened, Black folks still being able to, though there's a 13th Amendment, which speaks about abolishing slavery, and the 14th Amendment, which deals with citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, which deals with Black men voting, and then later on, women voting, and poll tax, and literacy tests, and intimidation, and lynching, and convict leasing, Black codes, and the list goes on and on and on and on. We see that anytime there's been advancements, anytime there has been a step forward made by Black folks, especially, there's always been that white backlash. There's always been that white response and that white reaction, which is why I oftentimes say, when it comes to us being fearful, when it comes to us being afraid, or when it comes to us being uncomfortable or worried, what I would say is, let us not only just study Project 2025 and its implications, and Agenda 47 and its implications, but let's also study the white psychology and the ideology behind the documents. And oftentimes we'll see we may have some fear, and fear in and of itself doesn't have to be a bad thing, but if it puts us in a situation where we're unsettled and we can't hold space for our clients and ourselves, and that could be a different thing. But what I would argue is that a lot of times we have this fear, which is reactionary, because white folks are afraid, white folks are fearful. And there's data from the Pew Research Center that speaks to, in 2009, a research poll where they asked different racial groups in America who was most optimistic about the future of the children. And so the majority of all groups, Blacks, Asians, Latinos, on some level, said that they were optimistic, but the only group that said that the group with the lowest total at 41% were white folk. And then in 2016, there was another study that was done by the Pew Research Center, and they asked, are you optimistic about the economy during the next 10 years? African Americans, even though according to this particular study, showed up with the lowest amount of wealth, they had the highest level of optimism. However, white folk had the lowest level of optimism. So why do I say that? I say that when we talk about this fear and this worry and this anxiety that white folks have to still uphold the hegemonic control and the domination and the power structures that have been in place for a long time, much of that is rooted in the competition, the replacement. In 2043, it's been said that by that time, whites will not be the dominant majority any longer. The reason why that is a big deal is because when we think about that, then we're talking about these narrative wars. Who's able to tell the story? Who's able to rewrite history? So a lot of these things that we're speaking to, and I know many of us probably already are aware of this, so we'll unpack this layer by layer today. A lot of this stuff, family, is already happening. A lot of this stuff is already going on. And I would once again urge us to examine history, especially white psychology, and we'll see that a lot of this stuff is not necessarily new. It just might be in a different format or in a different framework. So I'll just leave it at that for now, and we'll continue on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nix. Dr. Mizelle, if you want to take a stab at that, and I also want to welcome Brother Cliff Kumba on board as well. We'll come back to you, Mr. Kumba.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is in reference to Project 2025 and how the shift in the discourse surrounding women's, because we haven't brought about women's civil rights, so which I also want to add in reference to what we're talking about, which is very important, focusing on economic development and how empowerment, and so how the early movements, like primarily suffrage, legal equality and access to education, how that was limited in the past, and now what does that look like now, for us intersectionality in reference to the experiences, always been focused on middle class white women, and how now the focus may have shift. Now that's what we want this to shift towards, all women. Different technology and innovation in reference to legal reforms and social reforms, and what does that look like now for us in reference to, especially with people isolating more. I think social isolation. I think Project 2025 will help where actually people will focus, I think, more and being more isolated in reference to what's going on, especially if they're not having safe spaces to actually be able to have their ideas embodied or decision-making practices taken into account.
Thank you, Dr. Mizelle. Cliff, Brother Cliff Kuumba, I'm not sure. Did you want to introduce yourself and be a part of the panel today, or are you kind of laying back?
Pardon me. I'll just introduce myself real quick. I'm probably not going to talk as much as I was originally planning to, because I've been fighting a cold for the last couple of days. I took a COVID test and it said it was negative. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean I don't have it, but I'm going to go on faith that I don't. At any rate, I'm Brother Cliff. That's what everybody generally calls me. And I am originally from Washington, D.C. I live just outside of Baltimore, Maryland now. I am the Maryland facilitator of the 6th Region Diaspora Caucus, which seeks to essentially, through the use of Pan-African town halls and forming coalitions between organizations, seeks to leverage the voice of the grassroots Pan-African diaspora, take it to the world stage, African Union, United Nations, Organization for American States, independent Pan-African congresses, and what have you. I'm also on the North American Regional Coordinating Committee of the Pan-African Federalist Movement, which has its mission to essentially create the political unification of the 55 African countries, the 15 or so African-run countries in the Caribbean, and Black populations in countries around the world in the United African States. And I'm also the moderator of the Maryland Pan-African Cooperative Coalition, which is working over the last couple of years to bring a lot of these different Pan-African organizations that all say we must unify, to actually get them together and put their money where their mouth is. So the coalition has been holding a number of Zoom meetings between activists and organizers, and the coalition has actually taken over SRDC's former mantle of holding Pan-African town halls at the grassroots level. And we've had 2 so far this year, and we're going to have a 3rd one. And I'll see Dr. Winkler for the 3rd one at Temple of New African Thought on October 12th. Don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to say in introduction.
Okay. Other than that, what's your framing as you approach this particular conversation? In a few seconds, please.
I'm sorry. Say again.
What's your framing? What's your
well, basically, my I guess you would say, as I think as you mentioned in your initial question, what my and I'm just saying this because it gives me an opportunity to say this word in a sentence. My epistemological framework basically just comes from what I've learned about Pan-African organizing, the work of our honored ancestors, contributions that I see, the contradictions I see between the need for unity we all espouse and the fact that our supposed Pan-African organizations tend to gather in cliques. So basically, my perspective comes from there in terms of how to bring together all these different types of organizers, activists, and that most importantly includes people in the healthcare, mental health care communities, because those experts, those knowledgeable people such as yourselves are underrepresented, it seems to me, in a lot of our organizing work.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Kuumba. Did you want to respond to the next question? To the previous question, or I'll move on to some other questions.
Let's see now. I might have gotten on a little. And apologies again for that. I might have gotten on just a little bit on the late side, so I might have.
So what I'll do is I'll move on to the next question for the sake of time, and then
Good.
We'll go from there. Okay.
Excellent.
And so the next question is and then I'll open it up soon enough for the participants. I'm gonna ask 2 questions in one here. because I think they kind of relate to each other in some ways. In what ways might Project 2025 and Agenda 47 shape school curriculum, especially with respect to African American history and our unique experiences in the United States? What are some potential outcomes? And I'll ask that question, and I'll try to couple this one with it. Just in less than maybe, let's say, 3 minutes, respond to it. And how could Project 2025 and Agenda 47 impact educational funding, predominantly Black school districts? Will these policies help or hinder efforts to close the achievement gap between Black and white students? Now, you don't have to answer all of those different things, but just what part that you think you have a strength in. And let's try to do that in less than 3 minutes if we can.
Who was that question for?
Any of the panelists.
Okay. Well, I'll go, if it's all right, I'll go ahead
Mhm,
and
mhm.
start tackling that. So with Project 2025, it is continuing the attack that we see on the way that African American history is taught in schools. We saw over the past couple of years a number of states, especially former Confederate states, pass laws to ban the teaching of subject matter that they say students may feel makes them uncomfortable. Okay, or makes white children feel guilty about certain aspects of history, things of this nature. Project 2025 would end federal funds for schools that teach about race, racism, gender, and sexuality. So we see this continued attack on the teaching of the history of slavery in schools, the civil rights movement, et cetera. So Project 2025 would probably put that on steroids, number one. Number two, what it does is, even if it doesn't totally ban it, right? What it does is it causes fear among teachers because a lot of these laws in various states are so ambiguous. They're not clear. So teachers are afraid to teach certain subject matters, teach certain lessons because they are afraid of losing their job, being sued, etc. Okay. So it declares, it's declaring war on this. And also, one of the things that Project 2025 would do is restore what they call, quote unquote, patriotic education through the reinstatement of the 1776 Commission. Okay, so this was a commission from the previous administration, okay, not being partisan, just dealing with the history. And they also put out a 1776 report that told a ahistorical version of history, and that became under attack. Now, the 1776 report was a response to the 1619 project coming from the New York Times and Nicole Hannah-Jones, the journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones, which told a different perspective of the history of the beginning of this country, a lot of that from an African-American perspective. So Project 2025, no, is not going to be beneficial to African-American history being taught in schools.
Thank you, Mr. Imhotep.
So one of the things about the restructuring
we're hearing some feedback. And Brother Nix, you might be a little low, at least on my end. But yeah, I think you're having some tech issues on your end. If you could hear some feedback. If any other one, do you want to try it one more time? I'll pass it on to. Yeah, I'll pass it to another panelist while you attempt to get that together. Either Dr. Mizelle or Brother Kumba.
Man-Child in the Promised Land by Claude McKay, A Choice of Weapons by Gordon Parks, Rise and Fall of a Proper Negro by Leslie Alexander Lacey, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Crisis of the Negro Intellectual by Harold Cruz. That last one went over my head back there in junior high school, but still, those books helped kind of shape a lot of the where I am today. And they make these references in 2025 to essentially abolishing references or use of critical race theory, page 342, 348. But then they turn around and say, still, we're not going to censor what you teach in school. They say that So they contradict themselves on page 343. And all these books, at least to me, spoke to the Black experience, helped me understand what was happening in the world at the time. Again, I didn't quite get it until some years later, but the themes in these books were ideas that, again, I didn't fully understand at the time I originally read them, but I came to embrace them in later years. My 7th grade history teacher, Mrs. Jones, effectively explaining the extermination of the First Nations and the enslavement of Africans without freaking us all out by telling us that, quote, in the eyes of the Americans, they weren't really people. And that stuck with me ever since. That's the only thing I remember her saying. But I mean, she said a lot of other good things. And my 9th grade ancient and medieval history teacher, Mrs. Miles, saying, I am not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to teach you how to think. So these efforts by the Heritage Foundation to essentially, I guess, bleach the education that we receive. I mean, there are any number of classic books that are already on the banned book list in Florida and Tennessee and other places. So, so that's the impact that I see of that. Now, as far as the funding aspect goes, now they're talking about moving the funding and the accreditation of a lot of these schools to private entities or state chosen entities. And to me, depending on an exclusively privatized funding model, which they mentioned on page 340 and 353 of Project 2025, and I did most of my looking in there because to me, Agenda 47 was more like this is what we're going to do, and Project 2025 is more like this is what you should do. And Project 2025 had a lot more, I guess, meat to it, whereas Agenda 47 was like a lot of exclams and a lot of hyperbolic statements and that sort of thing. But to me, these schools would then be schools and school districts, which are critically underfunded in the best of times, would now be under the financial control of corporations that either seek to control how they educate the children, which Heritage Foundation claims to oppose, or systematically defund them altogether. So I just look at the redlining policies that went on back in the day, more recent treatment of Black citizens and the various financial crises that the country has endured since the 2008 housing bubble. I just say we can't trust those entities to adequately fund the schools that our children attend. I wrote some more stuff down, but I don't need to say it.
I'm coming back in. Can I be heard now, everybody, or am I still unclear and low?
It sounds like you're good.
Okay. Yeah. So just as some said way back in the day about states' rights, and it was never about slavery. It was about states' rights. And then as we look, where we are today at seeing the doing away with the Department of Education, now we have states, once again, many Confederate states, many right-wing states still upholding this educational landscape, which is to erase the history, minimize history. So we talked about banned books. Banned books are up 20% this year compared to last year. The numbers seem to be increasing. AP African American Studies being denied. Project 1619 not being allowed to enter certain places. The list goes on and on and on. And since 2016, Black and brown students have made the majority of the United States public educational space, even though 80% of those in front of them are white women teachers. But even furthermore, I can say from being in the K through 12 public school system and also being in higher ed, that it's a lot of wear and tear on Black educators, because it's as such where they're the participant and they're also the witness. So the dual task of trying to support our babies, our children, and uplift them using subversive tactics and means to try to feed them that history that they need, but yet not wanting to compromise their job, their livelihood. And we know that with some of us, there may be certain privileges and things that we might be able to consider that others, even those that we support, that we work with and care for, might not be able to consider. So you talk about, departments across the country. I know some colleagues in particular who are dealing with battles right now to keep their African American studies departments up and running. Or you talk about budgets and budget cuts, and how in certain communities, this is not anything new for many of us. The lack of funds and resources, especially Title I schools, those who get meal plans, and many students that I've known that I've worked with and families have really counted on getting those meals, mental health supports and services, special education. And special education is controversial because there are some that say, well, our children are overrepresented in special education to begin with, which is a whole nother conversation. But then you talk about also the funding that goes towards supporting those that they have disabilities and those who need supports. So the funding and the reallocation of things is huge. And that's big. That's big, I would say. The other thing that I would also say as well is when we talk about shaping the curriculum, I think it's incumbent upon our communities, our families, especially. There's an increase in genealogy right now, those doing family history, and I could advocate for the museums as well. One of the things that I noticed as a curator and a storyteller, one who was in exhibits, designing gallery spaces and putting artifacts and different materials together, I realized that even though there was in many times an attempt to delegitimize Black history and the erasure of history continued, I found that there was an adverse effect with those coming into the museum world, those who came into the museum for the exploration, and those who wanted to learn. And so even the research supports that museums are now the number one entity and the number one space where people seek authentic history. So as Carter G. Woodson said, I think it's an opportunity to really leverage and support those Black institutions, those parallel institutions, to preserve the history that also can be able to teach and provide that history. Although, as tax-paying citizens and stuff, there are of course things that we are owed and that we're due, and everybody may not be able to go to that African-centered private school, and everybody may not be able to homeschool. So we also, I believe, have to take into account the different class dynamics that we also have to really think about more broadly all of our people and not just one segment of our population.
Thank you, Brother Nix. Dr. Mizelle, you have it?
Yes. Just to add to the discussion, I think limiting the discussions on critical issues can contribute to, I know we talked a little bit about this mental health challenges for our students. So that the increase of limiting some of these critical censorship and critical discussions can lead to more overall decreased well-being in the students that we work with, like increased anxiety and depression, which I think is very important that we need to, be aware of and pay attention to. I think having more exposure to diverse perspectives fosters critical thinking. So when students are not allowed to engage with complex topics, then they don't have the analytical skills necessary to navigate. And that's the real world, and then understanding the complexities of the world that we live in. I think also it's a long-term academic consequences, restricting educational content, leads our students into a lack of comprehensive education, which they may struggle in higher ed settings. Also, in addition to censorship, I think if we would hinder the personal growth and academic growth if we always sense if there's a sense of censorship, especially with Project 2025. In addition, working with families in the schools, I think there'd be a disconnect between the families and schools with more censorship. And then again, there's a lack of safe spaces for our students to be able to blossom, or if we still have a lot of censorship. All the books that were named earlier, if I didn't get a chance to read those, where would I be now? If my parents and had that option, they have that space in school to talk about it, where would I be now? That made me think about it in reference to Project 2025, the impact on our workforce. If people don't have certain, I think, if they don't have are not prepared in a diverse workforce, if you're being censored now at a younger age, you're not able to take those particular skills to advance and working with other people, which again, I think will hinder the social skills of the students that we're working with.
Thank you, Dr. Mizelle. At this moment, I want to open up the floor for questions. I want to see if we can get some questions in the next 10, 15 minutes, then return to some final questions for myself. So I'm not sure if Dr. Battle or Vice President Angel has anything before I open up completely to the floor, or just go with the floor.
Well, thank you. I put in the chat, I was hoping that Michael could speak more on Schedule F for our audience, especially for those who may not be very familiar with what Schedule F is and how the 2025 and Agenda 47, how that can be challenged, some of the serious implications there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, I can address that. Thanks for the question. Because I just, before you answered that question, I pulled up the article from July 2022 that Jonathan Swan wrote for when he was writing for Axios.com. And I'll post it in the chat. I don't want to say it. I don't know if I can say the name because it mentions a president's name. So I don't want to get you all in trouble. But basically what happens is there are, for each administration, there are approximately 4,000 what are called political appointees that a president makes in his or her administration. What the Schedule F employees would do is it would reclassify civil servants, okay, tens of thousands of civil servants that work for the government. It would reclassify them as Schedule F employees and make them fireable by the president. And then the president can then fill, and it's estimated about 50,000, quote, it could apply to as many as 50,000 federal workers out of a workforce of more than 2 million. Okay. So then a president would be able to replace these approximately 50,000 workers with loyalists loyal to that president. Okay. Now, there's a number of problems here. Okay. Number one, when you work for the federal government, you're not loyal to a president. You serve the country, but you're loyal to a constitution, not a person. We don't have a king, okay? We don't have dictators. So it would give tremendous power to the president. And based upon Project 2025, they have a vetting system to vet people to make sure that they are loyalists to the president. Okay. Now, about 18.4% of African Americans make up the federal workforce. Okay. So when you talk about firing 50,000, all right, that's going to disproportionately negatively impact a lot of our family and things like this that are employed by the federal government. So something like this is a huge power grab. All right. And when you study Project 2025 coming from the Heritage Foundation and you research the history of the Heritage Foundation, this is all about power, but this is like power on steroids, what they're planning on doing. And I know some people say, I can't believe they wrote this down. I can believe it because they did the same thing in 1981. Okay. That was called Mandate for Leadership from the Heritage Foundation. All right. And they got, according to the Heritage Foundation, they got 64% of the 2000 policies that were in Mandate for Leadership. They got that implemented by that administration at that time. This is not the first time they've tried something like this. They're doing it again because it worked previously. But previously, we didn't have social media. Previously, we didn't have Taraji P. Henson at the BET Awards telling people to look at Project 2025. Okay. So that right there is devastating enough.
Thank you so much for your explanation.
You're welcome.
Dr. Battle, do you have anything? Thank you.
I said I was going to be quiet.
It's not too late.
I think that I've been observing the chat, and the chat has been going off. So I do appreciate the information that they have been sharing in the chat. I love the fact that this conversation is kind of getting back to what we initially had set up and wanted to talk about how this was going to impact our abilities as counselors, and it would impact our community if these were implemented. Dr. Mizelle started talking about the intersectionality, and she started mentioning women's rights. We haven't really delved into that. So if we could talk a little bit more about that, because it affects women, it affects Black people, but Black women in particular, it affects them differently. So if we could kind of talk a little bit more about that, and kind of speak to how that is going to impact our ability to act as counselors if this is implemented, because it not only affects the education that people receive, but it will also affect the type of services that we are allowed to provide as clinicians.
So you're talking directly to me? So yes, yeah, no problem. So in reference to that, I was thinking about how some of the clients that I see now are mostly mothers, Black mothers, with their children, and how things that affect them in school, the children in school, they'll pull out their children out of school and homeschool, or try to find other schools to send their children to. But I've always, when I'm working with the children, there's always a lot of different things in reference to depression and anxiety, and how the students have problems with the critical thinking skills, and how they handle different social injustices. I notice there's a difference in the children now and the children born 10, 15 years ago, in referencing how COVID is still affecting this particular population. So having things where again, I always keep bringing up about safe spaces for the actual students and the children to be able to evolve. I think that we also increase the anxiety and depression, because everything now is still affecting them. Working, the social media is affecting them in reference to how they are looking, and different things that the parents are having to deal with in reference to their self-esteem issues. I see a lot of boys, more Black boys with eating disorders, more than usual, more than in the past. So I think how things are handled within the family and in the schools, and if they don't have these particular conversations and comfortable with these different discussions, I think that's an increase of the stress on the mother, on the parents or the father, also in reference to their anxiety and depression levels and how they handle, which leads to other health implications and conditions that we know is all connected.
If I may also just chime in, no, I'm not a Black woman. Got much love for Black women, but as a professor, one who is also providing resource and services to my students, the campuses that I have frequented, and also even I've experienced even those in the high school arena are student parents. Or mothers who are also going to school as well. So what I would also say, in addition to what's already been said, is that there are layers to this, because you talk about all that comes with motherhood and parenting, and then having to shoulder all that comes with school and education, being Black, BIPOC, or however you choose to categorize yourself. And then we talk about student loans. And so I don't know if that came up as much in some previous conversations. And let me get the record straight, y'all. For me, look, I've been trying to get my loans forgiven, so I ain't missing out on too much on that one. But in general, though, I think that is something to think about when we talk about how even those going into the workforce, trying to provide for your families and trying to provide for your children, and we know all of our families are not as strong and functioning as they can be or should be. So that's another layer. And then on top of that, where were they born? I've seen situations, when it comes to financial aid, giving up that information, y'all, giving up where you from and financial aid, a little bit hesitant to say that, because one of the things that's also in the documents is this mass deportation energy that's going to come. So, am I going to be here next semester? Am I going to even be here next year? Is ICE or whoever going to come looking for me and my people and take me back cross seas? So there's so many things I think that are not only layered, but intertwined and interconnected, you know, from teen parenting or just student being a student parent or parenting in general, parenting rights, women's rights. And then you got the student loans and all of those types of things. And then, so it is a lot to unpack and a lot to unravel. I just wanted to also include some of those things because, you know, as multifaceted people, there's a lot of multiple things happening at once in terms of what the implications and what the impact of these things could be.
I had another question to throw out to the panelists. And we haven't talked much about it here the past few weeks. And it's the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. And how I'd like to hear from you guys about how that impacts higher education as well as future employment. I know we have a lot of students here, and you know, what is that going to mean for them in the workplace, especially if they in both the private and the federal government, private sector as well as federal government. I'd like to ask and start with if we could go with Brother Nix and then maybe Dr. Mizelle and then Mr. Michael Imhotep.
So you're speaking to affirmative action and the implications of that?
Supreme Court's ruling about what, in 2022, 23, you know, it changed things from what we have known for several years. So how does that ruling, how do you see it in relation to Project 2025 and Agenda 47? How do you see that impacting, if at all, the future of higher education for our Black community and children, and also their employment?
Well, I would say that you know, we have different educational settings in terms of four-year institutions or two-year institutions, community colleges, different things like that. I think when you look at what has been done to Black folks historically, affirmative action is something that could definitely open up the door and the gateway to be able to have access to educational opportunities, resources, and things like that. However, I believe it's always important in these conversations to talk about the nuance and the complexity, because there are those in our own community who would oppose the free handout. I don't need affirmative action, or I can, you know, and there are some who have that perspective. Of course, not everybody, not all of us, but that is a perspective. But I would say that it just continues to make things a little bit harder, a little bit challenging. I think those who do get in office or who get in these spaces because of some of that, I think it also makes people a little more quick to say, oh, you wasn't qualified. You were just a DEI hire. You know, you was just such and such. So it just makes, it can make the life of the administrator or on down to the students a lot more challenging and a lot more difficult. And we've seen a lot of things play out in terms of the higher education arena and what has been happening, especially when it comes to Ivy League schools and Harvard and different places like that. But I think also it's also yet and still, and I want to bring the community back into it and not really minimize that. I think about something that's happening at the TNAT Holistic Wellness Center with what Dr. Alsar is doing. Well, there's a community lecture series and a communiversity that's taking place. So not to, of course, just say, well, disregard that fight in the higher ed. But what I'm also saying is we have to also continue to exercise Kaumba, not Brother Cliff Kaumba, but the Kwanzaa principle Kaumba creativity to continue to create and generate those different spaces to be able to foster and give us what we need, while we also continue to engage in that fight as well too. So I don't think it's this or that, but I would say it's this, that, and.
I was, thinking about the question that you asked, Angel, in reference to affirmative action. I actually benefited from affirmative action. And so I was thinking about how I ended up going to higher education was because people actually came into I went to North Carolina Central University, and I had people come in from a PWI and say, we need to meet a quota. At the time, to me, I thought it was normal that people said, we need to meet a quota. We need some more Black students. If you're qualified, we need you. We need to meet a quota. Now that I'm thinking about it, it sounds kind of, funny, but it helped. I ended up having a full ride, full scholarship. Ended up at in Greenville, East Carolina. Then I ended up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But we all ended up there, but we all did the work. And we made, our parents and our ancestors proud. I think it levels the playing field. I think it needs to be part of who we are still, because I think we still have to level the playing field. Now it's different things and tactics and ways people go around not hiring people of color, and things they can say and write up now that, okay, you're not promoted, or we're not going to put you in this particular position. So I think it helped out a lot. And I think still, if it wasn't for affirmative action, I wouldn't have received some of the chances for leveling the playing field for where I am. And my parents and my ancestors, in reference to that, my grandparents, actually going, attending schools that were predominantly white, but were paid for in reference to his certain, monies that were available. I don't have any problems with that at all. I do have been around people that do say, no, we don't need this. I can do this on my own. But that's because they haven't experienced what it feels like to be pushed out of a particular position or a job based on your skin color only.
Well, thanks for sharing your experience. And because they ended it, the Supreme Court ruled to end affirmative action in the higher education in colleges and universities, where do we see our students, Black students, those of color, being able to benefit from what you benefited from, with this being, terminated? I'm going to go ahead to
Is that to me?
Actually is low.
Okay.
Because only affected higher education, it trickled down, and it affected other programs that were in place for Black people. For instance, the incubator program that was in Atlanta, where they were funding Black women's businesses, was impacted by this decision, and they can no longer do that. They've since stopped doing that. So it had a trickle down effect, which is what it was designed to do. And I think that when Dr. Mizelle shared her story, she actually addressed it. Like, the narrative is out there that it gives you an opportunity, but it doesn't give you an opportunity. You have to meet qualifications and criteria in order to take advantage of the opportunity. So you have to be at the same level as your white counterparts to take advantage of the opportunity. It just allowed you to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. And Brother Imhotep, you had unmuted, and I saw that Brother Cliff had his hand up, sorry. So I'll go to you, and then we can go to Cliff.
Oh, okay, thanks. All right, so a couple of things here. I'm glad you mentioned the Fearless Fund, because I've talked to those sisters on Roland Martin Unfiltered, and actually the same conservative activists who filed a lawsuit to end affirmative action in higher education also sued the Fearless Fund. Now, with affirmative action in higher education, Ed Bloom sued, saying it was affirmative action in higher education was a violation of the 14th Amendment of 1868, okay, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, just for those that forgot this history from middle school, the 14th Amendment was for Black people. The 14th Amendment was for former slaves, okay? After the 13th Amendment is adopted December 1865, which legally ends chattel slavery. With the Fearless Fund, that lawsuit, it was an appeals court of 3 federal judges ruled against the Fearless Fund, and that was a separate lawsuit. That lawsuit against the Fearless Fund from Ed Bloom also is saying that what the Fearless Fund is doing and giving a $20,000 grant to Black women-owned businesses is a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 was for Black people. It was for African Americans that allowed us to legally enter into contracts and negotiate for labor wages, things like this, the year after chattel slavery ended. So what they're doing is really diabolical. They're, on one hand, suppressing the teaching of the history of certain periods of time in school. And then they're actually going back to those same periods of time and taking laws from those same periods of time to attack us in the present and the future. They're attacking the teaching of the history of slavery, the history of the Jim Crow era after Reconstruction ends in 1877, all this, but you're going back to that same period of time and using laws against us today. When we talk about a nationwide ban on abortion, you have some people that want to go back to the Comstock Act of 1873, okay, which would, named after Anthony Comstock, which would do a national ban on abortion, but also ban contraceptives and some other things as well, all right? So, and also affirmative action coming out of the civil rights movement, coming out of being put in place 1965 affirmative action, that, just so people understand, and most of us know this, that was not a handout. That was a way to level the playing field to, because of a history of slavery, 246 years of slavery and Jim Crow segregation and segregation when it came to employment and things of this nature, okay? So it's important to, now, when we talk, I'm gonna wrap up with this here. I pulled up this article because I read it before. I monitor about 36 different news sources on a daily basis, right? There's a good article from NBCnews.com. Black enrollment dips at some top colleges after Supreme Court affirmative action ruling. And this is from September 4th, 2024, this month. I read it when it came out. And in the article, it says, in data released last month, so August 2024, MIT showed that 5% of its incoming class of 2028 is Black, 5% compared with 13% in recent years. Amherst College in Massachusetts saw a significant drop. Black students made up 11% of the Amherst class of 2027 and just 3% for the class of 2028. At Smith College in the same state of Massachusetts, 4% of its incoming freshman class is Black compared to 4.6% last year. Now, the same people who attack affirmative action when it comes to college admissions have nothing to say about legacy admissions, where you get to go to college because your daddy or your granddaddy is a multimillionaire and built the east wing of the college, or because your family or faculty and things like this at the college, so you get to go. They have absolutely nothing to say about that, but they want to attack something like this that is designed to address, one of the ways to address historical racism. As somebody famous once said, affirmative action didn't write your resume, but it forced somebody to read your resume. It's not a handout.
I would say that I definitely, to be clear, I definitely agree in terms of, I think Brother Nick, you said in the chat, how we frame stuff and how we perceive stuff. And I think that, you know, definitely is helpful to think about the perspectives that we bring into these conversations in terms of the multitude of experiences, backgrounds, different things like that. And I'm not surprised when I see a lot of these higher ed institutions are grappling with other things as well, with their history to slavery, or being on or being on top of plantations, or perhaps even the funding of these institutions that are denying these things that we so rightfully deserve. Having some of the funding, or a significant amount of the funding, coming from the enslavement of our ancestors. So I think that is something that is important to think about as well too. I think we also have to think about not just admission, but what are we going to do to keep our young folks and to keep our people there? See, it's one thing to get admission, and that's cool, and I think that's important. But I think, though, when we talk about shaping education and relationship building, and not having our children, our students, our people feeling invisible, the racial battle fatigue, and all of the microaggressions and things that happened, well, those things are real things. So I would even just really add and just say, okay, well, yes, getting there, that is important, right? That's owed to us. We could, the history is as long as you name it, in terms of all the reasons why we're deserving. But then how are we going to keep our people engaged? How are we going to build those relationships and really connect with them? And I think that is also important. And I don't want that to get lost as well too, when they go in these spaces and they're still invisible, and they want to get up out of there soon anyway. So I just wanted to also add that tidbit as well too.
Let me come back. Brother Cliff Kuma, thank you, Brother Sankofa. Brother Cliff Kuma, did you have something that you wanted to add to this? And then I'll return back to seeing if any guest audience members want to state anything, have any questions and like that, and then come to a finale as we approach in 5:30. It's 5:13 at the current moment. If we can make all our comments and things as brief as possible, but powerful.
Okay. Speaking again about the whole affirmative action question, in 1974, we had the Uniform Guidelines to Employee Selection Procedures. That was largely inspired by a court case several years before, where a guy named Griggs curb stomped the Duke Power Company in a federal court over racial discrimination in hiring practices. This basically led to more or less a new industry, I guess you might say, test validation and employee selection. I know because I was doing that work right around that time. There were certain things that you had to do. You had to research the jobs that you were going to select employees for, and you had to find a way to ensure that whatever you asked for in your qualifications and your testing procedures was relevant to the job related. Now, over the years, they've actually gotten lax on that. In the latter years of my time with the state of Maryland, which I escaped in 2013, I saw that basically the whole concept of doing the job analysis and doing the test validation and doing all of that really intricate documentation had been relaxed, where they weren't doing that so much anymore. You were more or less just taking applications and throwing them in a hopper and just pulling out whoever the heck you wanted. So a lot of those standards got relaxed at the same time that they started taking more and more pot shots against affirmative action. So you take pot shots against affirmative action, so then they stop calling it affirmative action. They call it diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, who could be against diversity? Who could be against equity? Who could be against inclusion? But they found a way to do it, and they found a way to make it a dirty word. And speaking of dirty words, you guys have used the I word twice now in this Zoom call since I've been here. And I'm not sure what happens if you use the I word, whatever that was. I don't know what happens if you use that I word 3 times. I don't know if somebody pops up in the mirror, but at any rate, they've now gotten to the point where DEI is such a buzzword, where Jasmine Crockett can be on camera upbraiding a right-wing senator or congressperson, I don't know which congressperson this was, for essentially calling her someone with a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a lieutenant commander in, I think, the Marines or the Navy, and going for her PhD, having had experience as a state legislator and other political oriented experience prior to getting into Congress, calling her a DEI hire. So they have taken these things and they've turned them all into buzzwords, and they have apparently done such an effective job of just mocking the whole thing, so that whenever you even mention something like that, now all of a sudden, oh, you're about hiring unqualified people. It's just like with illegal immigrants. The original illegal immigrants in this country who came in and exterminated the rightful owners of the country and then dragged other people in to enslave them are now calling anyone else who follows them, unless they look like them, illegal immigrants. And I'm going to end it there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaumba. Guest, I see Ms. Wilson Bates. Please, brief questions or statements, and also in response, panelists, brief response. Let's do some rapid fire to close this out strong. Ms. Bates.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Holloway Wilson Bates. Yes, long name. Lovingly Mama D. So we can keep that part short, lovingly Mama D. I do have a question. First of all, let me just say thank you for this information, because I was naive to quite a bit of it. Having so many sections to read or to try to understand, I appreciate you guys breaking it down for me. The question that I have is, with this appearance of this aggressive act of supremacy, will this affect the existence of HBCUs and or the subjects being taught, since the goal of the HBCU is the elevation of education in the Black community? And I ask that because I am a student at Bowie State University in mental health counseling, and and I'm quite curious.
All right, rapid fire, y'all. Let's drop it. Let's go with Brother Imhotep. You've been coming strong, and we'll pass it on.
Well, we know that since 2021, HBCUs have gotten now $17 billion in funding. I tell you, if Project 2025 gets implemented, that's going to dry up. That you're going to see an attack on HBCUs as well as MSIs, minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions. We know that under Project 2025, they want to end student loan forgiveness, okay, as well, and increase monthly payments. So that can definitely impact somebody who wants to go to graduate school at an HBCU, who has some type of student loans from undergraduate, et cetera. So anything with Black is going to be under attack with Project 2025. We know that they want to remove terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion from federal rules, regulations, contracts, grants, and legislation. So they're if this gets implemented, you're going to see an increase on the attack on HBCUs, but also a decrease in funding as well. And that's going to have, and then when you talk about one of the things they want to do is decrease the amount of funding for Pell Grants, okay? About 72% of African Americans who go to college get funding from Pell Grants. And it may not be 100% from Pell Grants, but about 72% of us that go to college get some type of funding for Pell Grants. When you talk about cutting funding for Pell Grants, you're going to reduce the number of us who can go to HBCUs, which will then also negatively impact the funding that HBCUs, about 103 HBCUs get. So it will have a devastating impact on historically Black colleges and universities.
Thank you, Mr. Imhotep. Any other guests, any other panelists want to respond to that? All right, so we're going to go ahead and if there's any other audience members that have any questions or brief statements, if not, I'm going to return to some of my concluding questions. All right, this looks like everybody's doing a good job here. I want to appreciate and thank everybody for joining in, asking questions and answering the questions, and having a fruitful discussion here today. So in closing, I'm going to close out with two questions. All the panelists have the questions here, so it might seem a little long for some of us, but I'm going to close out with these questions here. What are the role of political activists playing in addressing the challenges or opportunities presented by these policies, particularly with regard to advocating for mental health and educational needs of Black students? 1, 2, what strategies could be implemented to ensure that these policies, if enacted, do not disproportionately harm vulnerable populations within the Black community, including students with disabilities, LGBTQ plus community, individuals, and those living in poverty, so on and so forth. All right, panelists.
I'll go first, if I may. So I think as political activists, healers, therapists, clinicians, I think it's important to also do the work to take care of ourselves. As we are active in the community, tending to the needs in a selfless manner of tending to our clients and individuals, I believe it's important to make sure that we do, what we need to do to stay balanced, mind, body, spirit, and to stay connected to resources and things that can be restorative. Number two, I think it's important to remember that we have agency. I think it's important to remember, because I know in these conversations, it's easy to speak about what's going to be happening to us, what's going to be done to us. But I think as our ancestors have shown us, they have given us some examples that we can glean inspiration from, that they have been movers and shakers and have been able to enact their own energy to bring about some realities and their own merits. So I think it's important to also remember that, to put things into perspective. I think that it's important to support the organizations that already exist, and to build those, and to make sure that we put our energy, our time, and support to building those up. I think it's also important to get involved with cultural and historic preservation. And what I mean by that is, as a historian, I've really gotten deeply into that, because I find that even though we spent much of the time, or a portion of the time, talking about history, the banning of stuff, the erasure of stuff, the attack on Black stuff, there are also some of our people, understandably so, because trauma is real and those challenging memories are real. We're also reluctant to tell our own history. We're also reluctant to tell our own story. So I would also urge us to also not be afraid to tell our story. And I get it when people have been used to stuff being stolen or stuff being distorted and taken, but I would also encourage us to preserve what we have. So in the museum spaces, one of the things that has happened is the Black museum movements of the past, in the 60s on up to present day. So I think we can leverage alternative spaces to continue to teach and educate. When it comes to the voting, I think it's also important to understand that for those who decide to vote, okay, cool, that's fine, but voting is not the end all be all. And I say that because I think oftentimes, not saying this is anybody here in our space, or it could be, but I think sometimes we'll go to the ballot and then we'll leave, and then it's a wrap, it's over. So I would say that, sure, if we decide to exercise that due diligence, but I think it's also important to be connected with other things as well, too, to be able to also be active and engaged as well. And the last thing I would say is continuing to have spaces like this to be able to share perspectives and insights and thoughts with individuals who have different lenses outside of our own. So thanks for having me. Enjoyed the conversation and look forward to attending the ones to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you. 1 minute drills, y'all. 1 minute drills. Let's get it.
I just would like to add, yes, the practice self-care and becoming or being resilient and adaptive because of the different issues that are surrounding us. Continue educating ourselves and others, and again, having these wonderful workshops and engaging in the community is very helpful, and also utilizing social media, I think, is advantageous.
Thank you, Dr. Mizelle.
Political activists like Baltimore's leaders of a beautiful struggle have examined the political records of many of Maryland's public service and servants. They published report cards for the general public, complete with their analysis of the records of the state delegates, senators, council people, so on and so on. They've also spoken on radio programs, community and political forums. Hopefully they'll be able to come to our electoral politics town hall at Temple of New African Thought on October 12th. Their work needs to continue. It actually needs to be ramped up, and they need our support to be able to do that. Black-led political parties like Maryland's Ujima People's Progress Party need support to increase their efforts to get UPP certified as a political party on the Maryland ballot, give us alternatives to the elephant and the donkey. Political activists need to work more effectively with mental health advocates and educators to develop a real people's platform on education They need to come out of their cliques, everybody does, and work more closely with Pan-African activists and organizers in all areas to build a cooperative coalition that can create multifaceted strategies that will deal with the multifaceted issues and attacks we face as a community. We need to build our own infrastructure, including the establishment of after-school community programs for children. A number of unpaid, unthanked, unappreciated activists already do that, but we need to support them so we can do more. Cooperative homeschooling, more robust envisioning of African-centered schools, because our enemies are going to try to destroy them COINTELPRO style, just like they've tried to destroy everything else, while decrying them as institutes of wokeness. More regular community outreach through community town hall meetings, and finally unifying our community and activist organizations again in those cooperative coalitions instead of allowing the current status of cliques to continue unchallenged.
Thank you, Mr. Koumba. I want at this moment thank you all for joining us, the panelists. And what I want to do.
Imhotep, did he give his final thoughts?
Mr. Imhotep, pardon.
All right. So number one, there are going to be massive lawsuits filed every step of the way to fight against policies implemented by Project 2025 that violate existing law. Number one, we'll see how that goes, but you will have those legal fights take place. We are going to have more freedom schools, more charter schools that we own, independent schools, things of that nature. And then also homeschooling. You're going to see an increase in homeschooling. A lot of times I speak annually at the Liberated Minds Black Homeschooling Education Expo in Atlanta. Then also, we know that as a result of the advanced placement social studies standards in Florida, we know that Black churches have started teaching Black history. It's over 200 Black churches. They've adopted a study guide, started teaching Black history in those churches. You're going to see something like that continue. Now, we're going to see what type of attacks they come under for doing that, what type of legal attacks they come under for doing that. But we're going to need more organizing and actually understanding the law. Everything that they do to us, they use the law to do it. And then when they get caught breaking the law, they go hire an attorney at law to defend them in the court of law. So the common denominator is law. So I argue when I teach principles of political self-defense, we need to understand the law better than they do and try to disarm them of that weapon.
Thank you, Brother Imhotep. Pardon for me. I thought I called on you, but yeah, pardon. So at this moment, I want to turn it back over to Vice President Moss and President Battle and closing us out. I want to thank you all again for coming out, all the panelists. Thank you.
Yes, I also want to thank everyone. This has been really great these past few weeks. We will meet again next week as our closing session. We invite you to come back and attend. And I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Battle, our president.
Okay, I don't know why you all keep calling me Dr. Battle. Okay. Y'all know me as Nick. Y'all can call me Nick. It's fine. I want to say, I think it was great. I enjoyed the conversation. Some people did inquire about joining NABC. I have put that information in the chat. This has been recorded, so it will go up on our YouTube page as all of the other discussions have. And I do share the link with, I'm making you doctor, so Dr. Moss, future Dr. Moss. So I'm speaking that into existence. And Dr. Winkler, and then they share that with our panelists so that you all can share it on your social media as well. Join us again next week. It'll be an interesting conversation because the folks that y'all have talking next week are very strong, opinionated folks. It's going to be an interesting conversation. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you all.
Peace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, thanks. Peace.